Timer is timing.
All right, you're on.
Okay. This week we should be able to begin with vaYiqra chapter 20. I have something I wanted to do just before that. It's actually lecture 8, which I haven't gotten to yet, but it fits with this chapter very, very well. So it may seem a little off kilter for a minute or two, but by the time we get to the middle and the end of this chapter, you'll realize how apropos this is. Anyway, Onkelos's vaYiqra, Drauzine and Wagner. Um, Looks an awful lot like this. This is a great translation. It has the Aramaic and the Hebrew in it, as well as a lot of commentary by Drauzine and Wagner. Very smart guys. I don't agree with, of course, everything they say, but I agree with an awful lot of it. They're very, very, very smart guys. Anyway, that book says Abraham Ibn Ezra, in his commentary to Exodus chapter 20, verse 2, states that the Torah was given to Moses's generation, in a manner and language that they could understand. This generation of erstwhile, that means former, erstwhile slaves had primitive notions about many things. And human nature, now, mind you, they're summing up somebody else's work. They're not saying this. They had notions of many things, and human nature being what it is, there was no way to magically transform them. Again, he's summing up because God could have done that, right? So saying that there's no way is silly. But again, he's summing up even Ezra, right? Thus, the Torah addresses the moral and spiritual behavior and development of the individual and society from the perspective of their somewhat primitive needs and understanding, but did so in a way that encouraged them to understand that the Torah was teaching that there was a higher level of behavior that they must develop. And to which I say, this is my commentary, wow. So from Father Abraham to Moshe, Jews were little more than Neanderthals, which is the right way to say that word, who would grab women by the hair, drag them into their caves, have sex with them, and for some reason those women would stay with the Jewish slug from that point on. Further, if Jewish men didn't molest his own daughter, his sons did to keep human civilization going, of course. These brutish, uneducated, unrefined men had no understanding of civility, manners, or culture, and because of the inbreeding, they lived like wild animals. Is that what we're supposed to get from that? Because that's what I got from it. Drauzine and Wagner go on, and again, they're talking about somebody else's opinion, not theirs. Thus, for example, although the Bible allowed slavery, it phrased its laws carefully to help the people understand that every individual is created in the divine image. All humans come from the same Adam, and slaves must be treated humanely. The biblical goal was achieved. The Talmud teaches that he who acquires a slave is actually acquiring a master. And ultimately, because of the way the Torah taught its laws, slavery was abolished. It is the same with the chapter of Leviticus, speaking of chapter 20, which addresses additional practices that are totally inconsistent with the concept of holiness that is the general theme of this section of the Torah. My commentary, wow, So God okayed slavery for the dumb Jews, knowing that later on some smart Jews would come along, disregard God's apparent okay of slavery by manipulating Bible verses concerning holiness. And remember, the Talmud teaches that he who acquires a slave is actually acquiring a master. Don't worry about the fact that these words make no sense at all. They sound deep, and that's good enough for us dummies. Wow. um, the Bible does not okay slavery. It never did. But my Bible says so. No, you're not reading a Bible. You're reading a translation. If you're reading the Bible, written in Hebrew by Moshe, you know better. There is a huge difference between indentured servitude and what Europe and the Americans did with the black people. They don't even, there's no comparison there. But that's what is happening here, because the men who wrote this lived while that was going on. All right. How far did I back up? Okay. The Talmud, they say, teaches that the penalties were instituted as an educational tool and that a multitude of judicial constraints were established to make sure that the death penalty, which was a mere threat, would not be carried out. For example, circumstantial evidence was unacceptable. Forget what God said. We decided, the smart Jews decided that circumstantial evidence was unacceptable. And two witnesses who saw the deed must testify. Furthermore, in other words, if a couple engage in adultery, there has to actually be two or more witnesses that actually saw the adultery take place. Not that they saw the two go into a room and close the door, but they were apparently in the room after the door had been, or before the door had been closed. Which ought to make you think about that story with Yeshua. Just saying. Blah blah blah. Already said that. Already that. Furthermore, the culprit had to be warned before the crime that if he committed it, he faced the death penalty. So if you go out and you're going to kill somebody and somebody warns you that you cannot kill somebody, well, then, the death penalty will apply. But if nobody warned you before you decided to commit murder, well, now it's not the death penalty. He goes on, and a person was not allowed to testify against himself. So God was just bluffing. He didn't really mean it. He didn't really mean what he said. He was actually just a big bully and a liar. That's what you were just told. No worries, though. The smart Jews wrote better laws and kept us dumb Jews alive. I guess that's when us dummies started getting smarter, too. Try to make that sound like a question. Or are we still dummies in need of the smart Jews to help us figure it all out? I don't know. Maybe so. Maybe that's why we still spend most of our time studying what the smart Jews said about the Torah and other stuff, and almost none of our time studying the actual Hebrew Torah. Just throwing that out there. They go on and say, Moses Maimonides also focused on the primitive nature of the early Israelites and the need to educate them. He wrote in his Guide of the Perplexed in chapter 3, verse 32, that the Torah laws were formulated in a way that took notice of the gradual development of people and society. It is impossible to go suddenly from one extreme to another. It is, according to the nature of man, impossible for him suddenly to discontinue everything to which he has been accustomed. Again, saying that the Jews were little more than Neanderthals, or at least the cartoon image of Neanderthals. Maimonides states that the Torah must consider the customs that were in those days general among men. Thus, for example, even though God, according to Maimonides, did not want the Israelites to offer sacrifices, it was in accordance with the wisdom and plan of God as displayed not only here but in the whole creation that he did not command us to give up and discontinue this manner of service dot dot dot. In the same manner, God refrained from prescribing what the people, by their nature, their natural disposition, would be incapable of obeying. Why then didn't God simply change the nature of the Israelites so that he could give them enlightened laws that they could understand? Maimonides explains that the nature of man is never changed by way of miracles. God would do so or could do so, but he has chosen instead to let the world function according to the laws of nature. Thus, there was no way to teach the Israelites of several millennia past other than through laws that they could understand. And so, fashion the laws so that they could lead the Israelites to a higher level of behavior and understanding. What an arrogant blowhard. So, the sages who taught us that, probably should stay up there. The sages who taught us that God created everything also claim that some things are not created, they are natural. In other words, they are self-created. Further, the same sages who taught us that God never changes the nature of man by miracles miraculously changed Pharaoh's nature by hardening his heart. Oh, oops, we forgot that part, Maimon. Obviously, it couldn't be that the Torah was formulated to develop God's law and thus holiness in his people over time because it is the best way to learn. It couldn't be that. No, it had to be because we needed to develop our social skills over thousands of years. So, was the development of the sages built from the gradual development of the animalistic Jews as well? Or was it the work of the super smart sages that helped the super ignorant Jews to begin their gradual development? My money is that Maimon and others thought it was the latter. The Torah tells us that God designed and then created everything. How then is their nature? What naturally designed, created, and then perfected itself? What on this planet naturally designed itself, created itself, and then perfected itself? What? Name one thing. One thing. You can't even prove that a cell does that. You don't believe me, just ask Dr. Tour. Further, where did nature get the materials needed such that it could somehow naturally exist? Is Maimon actually suggesting that God could not give us a Torah that is holy, just, and pure? I'm starting to think he never read it because it said it was holy, just, and pure. Is he suggesting that God could not and therefore did not give us a Torah with the laws and instructions to those laws according to absolute truth and purity from the beginning? Yeah, that's what he's saying. God couldn't do it because we're a bunch of animals. The Torah tells us that man was created in the image of God. Of God! Was Maimon actually suggesting that God was a Neanderthal? That he was animalistic, crude? Is he suggesting that God was forced to be a tyrant making threats of death until we could grow out of our barbarism and become refined with the new holy laws given to us via the brilliance of our sages? That is exactly what these two men, or both of them, are suggesting. And they're not the only ones. Maimon and the rest of the sages are, in fact, suggesting that the oral tradition is superior to the words spoken from the lips of God Almighty. They actually believed that their reshaping of God's law via the oral tradition was the actual plan of God for the Jews from the beginning. Maimon and others may not have been thinking in these terms, but this is exactly what they were suggesting. Drauzine and Wagner go on. Education aside, in view of the somewhat culturally primitive nature of the Israelites of Moses' generation, as seen by Ibn Ezra and Maimonides, it was necessary to deter the newly formed nation from improper behavior by imposing harsh punishments. The Torah, for example, wanted the Israelites to embrace a sexual moral code that weaned them away from the perverse and degrading culture and ethical influences of Egypt and the nations they would encounter in the desert and in Canaan. And that would instead enhance the integrity of the individual and the family. This all-pervasive, virtually worldwide depravity could only be deterred and eradicated by imposing harsh penalties on violators of the law. Yet, as we wrote earlier, still Drauzine and Wagner, the Torah was written in such a manner that the Jews ultimately came to understand what constituted proper behavior, so that these harsh educational and deterrent punishments became unnecessary. So God gave us a law, perfect, pure, and holy. But because the sages were so much smarter than the rest of us, we don't need it anymore. It is easy to talk down and find fault in people when you have 20/20 hindsight, don't you think? It is easy to say, I would have been like Moses and would never have made a golden cow for the people to worship. I wouldn't have complained about the lack of meat. I would have been happy with the manna. I wouldn't have doubted God. I would have lived in awe of God with a pillar of cloud by day and fire by night and a big old rock following us around providing water. I would have been. Where are the historical accusations of the Jews being sexual predators or like the Egyptians or any other barbaric culture? Where does the Torah say that the Jews were engaging in these behaviors? Oh, yes, there are no such accusations, except, of course, by the smart Jews, by the sages, who lived thousands of years after the fact. The arguments of the sages are that God had to dumb down the Torah for these low IQ simpletons, barely above animalistic behaving Jewish peoples. But don't worry, God knew that the time would come when refined, well-educated, extremely sophisticated Jews like the sages would be able to see through the archaic, unjust, unholy law that God gave at Sinai and give us an oral law in Talmud that would lead us uncivilized Jews to a higher consciousness, a higher appreciation for and superior knowledge of that which God really meant by the Torah. Does that about sum up what the sages believed? Well, in their defense, they did not have the past 100 years of our current times of major archaeological finds like the Dead Sea Scrolls. They did not have a computer. They could not go online and connect to libraries of major universities around the globe and download an almost endless number of books in PDF format. They could not search databases with thousands of research papers and doctoral dissertations spanning hundreds of biblical-based disciplines. With that in mind, I would never say the only thing more gargantuan than the sages' hubris was their colossal lack of knowledge. I would never say such a thing. So let's see if we can clear up a couple of issues here before we work our way through chapter 20. We know from a number of sources from the Second Temple period, the Dead Sea Scrolls in particular, that many Jews found fault in the Sanhedrin because they refused to kill people who had committed crimes against the Torah. The Sanhedrin was seen by the Jews as weak, feckless, and disobedient to God's law. By the 1st century CE, the vast majority of the Jews of the Jewish world had become so Hellenized that their understanding of the biblical text had become very literal. We also know, especially because of the New Testament letters, that the sect of Judaism to which Yeshua and his followers belonged were not literal in their interpretation of the biblical text. They were not. Translations are, but they were not. Thus, the old way of thinking and applying the Torah was harshly clashing against the Hellenism, against the Hellenized literal approach to understanding and applying the Bible. There was a huge clash happening in the 1st century CE. The clash between the old way of thinking and the new literal way is actually quite easy to explain. The old way of thinking, being idiomatic, is the key. When the Hebrew text says, die he dive, which yamut, it is not saying that someone should actually be put to death physically. It is a Hebrew idiom that is equivalent to our modern idea of excommunication. Idiomatically, there is no greater death than for someone to be separated from their family, friends, people, and nation. To be stoned is to have your name and offense chiseled into a stone. No one was to physically die. And eye for an eye, and sayings like it, an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, a hand for a hand, however that comes up, sayings like that are to be understood as the punishment must fit the crime. This is important because first-degree murder can be punishable by death, while involuntary manslaughter cannot. So, there was a thought that jumped in my head while I was reading that, and I thought I should probably say something. So thinking about what's going on in Israel right now, a lot of people have brought up, well, the Bible says you're supposed to kill every man, woman, and child. That is so, what's the word they're saying? It's so unjust. It's so immoral. That's what everybody keeps saying. It's so immoral. But if the Jews were to follow the yamut, die he dive, that would not start with them going and turning, their enemy's land there into a parking lot. Some people have suggested that, but that's not where you start. For them to die the death, they need to be excommunicated. So one thing that the Jews could do is a different kind of a two-state solution. Rather than leave them there where they are and leave Israel there where they are so that Israel can continue to be attacked, Israel could purchase some land from some Arabs somewhere, wouldn't matter where it was, and pack them all up in buses and take them out there. Oh, that's outrageous, Rob. Well, how come you're not complaining about the fact that they're doing that in Afghanistan? They've sent 2 million people away. Yeah, their own people. It's not really that outrageous if you're Middle Eastern, because they understand this concept. They have a problem with this group of people. They're sending them away. Moot. Al-Moot. Or Yamut. Maybe even Yamuto. That would be a good two-state solution. And Israel, if they did that, that all of the other countries, including America, would send billions of dollars to them so that they could build an infrastructure and make a city of their own and have a place of their own. And that's the end of the problem. But if that doesn't work, which it won't, because nobody will let Israel do what they ought to do, then death is the answer. Actual death is what's supposed to happen. Now, they're not trying to kill the population that lives there. They're just trying to kill the murderers. That's called war. That is not called a genocide. Anyway, just thought I'd throw that stuff in there and see if we can get started on this law, because it actually has something to do with our laws. So chapter 20, verse 1, of course, it's the beginning of a new section. We're basically still on the holiness thing, that we just left off from. And it starts, but it may be a different level, because we're going to talk about some of the same things. So you get the overview, and then you get it deeper, and then you get it even more deep. That's a good way for people to learn things, is just to add on top of what you already know. It's the best way for humans to learn. All humans, whether you learn by sight or hearing or whatever, this is the way to go. So that's the way God did it, understanding his creation. So it starts off, and Yahweh spoke to Moshe, saying, as you might well expect it to. But boy, he starts off with a long-winded one. Very literally in English, verse 2 is, and to children Yisrael shall say man from children, Yisrael, and from the stranger that dwell in Yisrael, that he gives seed Moloch, dead he dies, people the land, he stone, he wisdom. See why I kind of went where I did with this today, right? So, the L is in too, B'nai, children, which includes men and women. It's Yisrael, so it's everybody of Israel. Tamar, so it's you shall say. It's the primary signification is the bearing forth, the bringing something to light. So the way I like to put the meaning to this word is it's to shed light on the subject, because that's a good way to say it. It says, Ish, man, mi b'nai, which is from the children. So man from the children. I'll make it make sense in a little bit. Yisrael, of course. Umin, and from Hager, and from the stranger. How would we say man in English? That another, one to another is usually how we translate ish, man. One to another is usually a good one. I'm not sure if that's what I use for the translation, but that's the most common use when you see that word, because again, this is a different language. We speak Hebrew differently than you speak English, okay? So then it's Hager, which is the stranger, the sojourner, a temporary visitor. In the Septuagint, they replaced this word ger, because Hager is the ger, right? What we just called stranger. But they used in the Greek text proselutos. You hear proselyte? Hopefully you do. You heard it enough. The proselyte. So it says, Israel, Umi, Hager, Hagar. So you hear what's happening here? We said man. So that's one another, if you will. And then it's, wait a minute, look at the spelling here. Okay, I think the spelling is exactly in Hebrew, but I have two different words, and it makes more sense. It looks like I got the right meaning, but the wrong word. This is that dwells. So the stranger who dwells, who turns aside from his way so that he can, sit down and rest and maybe sleep in a motel or whatever, it's to dwell somewhere. Actually, that may be the same word, because this would be of a dweller, a stranger. And this is Beg Yisrael, so he dwells in Israel. But why would the number be so different? A temporary visitor. So they must be from the same root. So your root word is to dwell. So the visitor is somebody who dwells. And we've already established that that's a proselyte. In Israel, Asher Yiten, so that he get he the word is give. It's Natan, like Nathan, give, to cause to receive, to place into somebody's hand, but it's also to establish, to set in place. It's both ideas come from the same word. So then it says mi zaro. So these are that's seed, and it's seed he. So it's his seed, his descendants, his children. That gives his children. I got you. He gives his children la molech. He gives his children to Moloch. Mut yumat. Yeah, so here we're not saying mato, but it's mut yamut. Die he die. So remember what I just said. We're talking here excommunication. He's excommunicated from the people. Is people. Haaretz, the people of the land, so it's the Israelites. Yer gemuhu. That's the bringing or joining together of something, so he is being disjoined. There is a grammar rule I found. It says that when this particular word, Yergemuhu, I'm not sure what the root of that is, but it says when it's followed by the Hebrew word al, it is of persons who are to be stoned to death. Now, I don't agree with that, but this word is not followed by al, so it certainly doesn't apply here, even if that's correct. I don't think it is, but if it were correct, it wouldn't apply here anyway. Then it says va aven, Evan, stone, rock, pebble, it's used of all those things, large and small. So it'd be stoned. So here we go, my translation. And say to the Bnei Yisrael, say to the children of Israel, anyone, I knew I wasn't using the one another or something like that. I forget what I said a while ago, but anyone is what I decided to use for man name, ish. Anyone of the sons of Yisrael and of the proselytes who dwell in Yisrael, who give their children to Moloch. So it doesn't, if whether you're Jew or not, if you give your child to Moloch, die he die. And this one is instead of he die they, it's just the second part is the feminine plural. So die he dies, which does not change the meaning in any way. It's just the grammar of this Hebrew sentence forced that to be a tate instead of a vav. Anyway, so they are excommunicated. The people of the land will chisel his name and offense in stone. There was, how did I miss the word for? Oh, in a stone. Yeah, because it's va-aven. So in a stone. It's to carve in stone. So they will chisel their name in stone. And what they used to do back in this time period was if you did some terrible offense, they had these stones at the entrance of the city, and they would put their laws, you can't kill, you can't steal, whatever. And if you're not from here or not staying with someone from here that's going to vouch for you, you have to leave before the sun goes down and the gates are closed. They would have things like that, but they also would have the names of people who have done certain offenses, because that was to remind that person and anyone else that that person is no longer allowed back in the city. That was the whole point. Onkelos, Onkelos's vaYiqra by Drauzina Wagner said, Am haaretz, in modern Hebrew, the phrase is frequently used to disparage a single individual as a fool or ignorant person. So if you're called the Am haaretz these days, that is a cut down. However, in biblical Hebrew, the term means people of the land and refers to the general community of the Jews. Okay, we're doing good. Let's look at verse 3. Very literally in English, it says, And I give faces my in man the he, which of course the he means these, and cut off with he from midst people he, for seed gave Moloch to purpose unclean, sanctuary me, and to defile name holy me. You may have already picked up on what I said. If it sounded outrageous, right here it's going to clear it up. Well, how are you going to send them out from the people if they're dead? Just throwing that out there. Va'ani, and I, eten, I give, or I will give, because the aleph has been added to the front, so it makes it futuristic. It's to give, to put in somebody's hand, to place, to set. And it says, et panai, my face. Of course, it's in plural because it's God and God's alive. So it's, if it's speaking of the real God, it's always in plural, not because there's a Trinity. They didn't know what that was, because it didn't exist in their time period. But you said it in plural because it indicated that he was a living God. Because a non-living God only has one face. If you carve a happy face and turn it upside down, you can't say it now has a frowny face. It's an upside down happy face, right? So if you do a frown, you can't turn it upside down and call it a happy face. It's an upside down frown. Hopefully you guys are following what I'm saying. A carved idol only has one expression. A living God has many expressions. So he is referred to as gods, not because there's plural again, but because he's alive. And his face is referred to in plural because it's always moving, it's looking, it's seeing, it making different faces of the joy and the elation and the anger and all of the things that come with it. So it is always said in plural for that reason. It's even done of human beings that are alive. If you're alive, this should be in plural. And it is sometimes used in the biblical text of a God being alive in someone's mind. So it's put in plural because that person actually believes that that piece of stick can do something for him, or that piece of stone can do. Anyway, now we have ba'ish, which is in or with man. Hahu, that's the these, or the he rather, which means these. I said that a while ago. Then we have vaYiqrati, and cut off. To cut off as part of a garment, you know, take that, cut it off. So it's of cutting something off. Oto, which that's really just a pointer. It's from the word et, and then it has the vav has been added to the end to mean it or he. We'll find out. Mikerev, from the midst. So it's he, because he's going to be cut off from the midst. Now, this is the same person who was supposed to be put to death a while ago. Now he's being told to be, we're hearing from God that he's to be cut off from the midst of the people, because it says Amo, of his people. Doesn't matter if it's why proselyte is so important for us to understand, because this person who did this is to be cut off from his people. If you're a proselyte or a Jew living in the land, that makes the Jews your people, right? At least biblically it did. It doesn't seem to do that anymore, but it did back in the Bible days. Then it says ki mitzaro, so from the seed, natan, that's to give, to set, to place. La Moloch. So because he gave to Moloch his seed, his children. Then it says La Ma'an, which is for the purpose, for this purpose, or for the purpose of Tame, of being unclean, or the uncleanness came about because of, you could say because of instead of purpose, because of, or because of might make more sense. Et mikdashi, because of my sanctuary. The uncleanness can't be there, right? And it says ule chalev, which is and to defile. And that's of a like stabbing somebody in the, with a knife or something, or perforating something with a knife or something sharp anyway. And that's what we use for defile in Hebrew. And what is he cutting into? It says Shem. And of course, these days Jews think of that as name, Hashem, the name. No, it's authority. Shem is authority. Stop in the name of the law. What are you stopping in? Some guy because some guy is named Law? No, it's when a police officer says that, he's saying, I have the authority. I'm wearing a badge, got the gun, all that. Maybe you should listen to him. Just saying, he has the authority to tell you to stop. So that's what Shem really is. So we get authority that is Kadashi. Did I miss a word here? I don't think I did. No. But the authority, and then we have Kadashi, because I am holy. So he's perforated that authority. And you can't do that because God is holy. Not a mean tyrant, but holy. So my translation, and I will turn against this man. I will give my face to this man was literally what word for word it says. But what God's saying is, I will turn against this man and will cut him off from the midst of the people, because he gave his child to Moloch, such that my sanctuary is unclean and my holy authority is defiled. Verse 2 used the phrase die he die, and here in verse 3 the phrase and cut off he from midst of people he are both idiomatic phrases with the exact same meaning. In fact, you could say that the one explains the other, and you can go either way. It doesn't matter which one you read first or second, they both actually explain the other. To be cut off is to be put to death. This is how I know this, because it says it right there in the Torah. But they're both idiomatic phrases, meaning, die he die, and cut him off from the midst of the people means that the offenders are to be excommunicated. However, it is more than being cut off from the midst of the people. They are cut off from the people, the land, and Yahweh God himself. They are dead to God. There is no hope for their soul. Additionally, while these phrases will change a little from verse to verse for the sake of breaking up the monotony, that's why it's said two different ways, why you essentially get two different idioms. It breaks up the monotony. The meaning, of course, does not change. Verses 2 through 5 are actually one very long sentence. And we're broken up because of the English aversion, I can't even say that word, aversion to run-on sentences. Our dislike of run-on sentences is why this one very long sentence got broke up into a whole bunch of them. Onkelos's vaYiqra by Drauzina Wagner says, he describes the worship of the idol Moloch as a popular and widespread practice still prevalent during his lifetime in the 12th century. I'm not actually sure who he's speaking of. It's either Ibn Ezra or Maimon. I'm not sure which he is here. Maybe it'll say later. During his time in the 12th century. Well, it could have been in either one of them. Maimon's my guess. Its adherents used all kinds of psychological pressures and threats and pandered to the superstitious fears of the uneducated mother, who were especially susceptible. The mother? You think the dad didn't have anything to do with this? Since these mothers, the caretakers of their children, tended to weaken before the idolaters, this has got to be Maimon, cunning onslaught, they gave up their children to be burned to the idol. The law makes, therefore, an earnest stand against this practice and uses in reference to it stronger terms than any other kind of idolatry. Namely, he defiles my sanctuary and profanes my holy name, as they say. No, here's what happened. Up until I read this, I did not know Moloch sacrifices were still being made in the 12th century of our time. I did not know that. I find it very hard to believe, but this isn't America we're talking about either, so who knows? Well, maybe they do. But that's their claim here. But Drauzine and Wagner are making that claim. Of course, they're talking about something that I'm almost positive Maimonides said, because he was the one that was the furthest over the top with thinking that he was smarter than everybody else, but he wasn't the only one. No, what's going on is if you live in a small village, which most people did, even in the 12th century of our time, most people. Now, you can get a whole lot of people packed into certain places in Europe at the time, but when you go around the globe, most people still lived in small groups. So when you're in a small group like that, if you don't sacrifice your oldest child to this Moloch, and then the crops fail, the water doesn't come from the sky, or bugs come and eat all the crops or whatever, guess who's going to get blamed? So you, your spouse, and all of your children, your parents, your cousins, all of you are going to be put to death. That's why people kept doing it. Didn't have anything to do with women being weak. Cheapers. Anyway. Wow. Yeah. Oh, I think I've got enough time to work on this one. So verse 4, and if he hide, they, people of the land, eyes them from the man, the he, in other words, these, in give he seed Moloch, or Molech, to not me kill with he. Okay, so ve'im, so and if halem, well, that's to hide, to conceal. Ya limu, that's the same word actually. They just added some things to the front and the back of the word. So if he hide they. So it's hide they is really what's being said here. So that's making it real serious. So if the people are hiding this, ha'aretz, the people of the land are hiding this, Enechem means, so from their eyes. In other words, if they're ignoring it, they're pretending it didn't happen. They're looking the other way. That's how you hide it from your eyes. Ha'ish, the man, hahu, these men, betito, which is literally in give he. So this is who gives, probably going to be Mizaro, his seed, his children. La Moloch, to Molech, sorry. The Moloch is what we say these days. Le vilti, such that Hamit, make dead. So in other words, if he's sacrificing that child, Oto, his child. And if the haaretz, the people of the land, surely ignore, hide they, eyes them. If they surely ignore, if they surely look the other way, They absolutely ignore, absolutely look the other way. You can say it any way you want to, as long as it's something like that. This man who gave his child to Moloch, such that uh, oh, it's like that sentence doesn't make sense. It's because it's not the end of the sentence. We still haven't gotten to the end of the sentence, so that threw me a little bit. This man who gave his child to Moloch, such that he's not being excommunicated, make dead he, such that he has not been excommunicated. And okay, so the next verse, and establish me, I faces my in man, the he, and in family he, and cut off with he, and all the adulterer after he to adultery, after the Moloch from midst people. And believe me, this is finishing up the sentence. This is the same subject. Nothing has changed. Santi, I am going to put my foot down. This is to put, to place, to set, to constitute. Ani, so I'm going to do this. Panai, I'm going to establish my face. Baish, against that man. Hahu are those men, that happens to be more than one. U vamish pachto, and in his family. So God's going to turn his face against the man and his family. They're all going to pay the price for this. Everyone who turned their eyes away, everyone who's pretending not to notice. Then it says, vaYiqra, to cut him off. This is Oto, him. And Kol, and all Hazonim, and all the adulterers. You understand that by giving your child to this idol, that makes you an adulterer. Whether you're a Jew who has agreed to live by the law via our forefathers, we weren't there, but it is as if we were there, because when our forefathers said, everything you say we will do and obey, that goes all the way to us and everybody that comes after us. We're all included in that. We don't get out of it just because we don't want to be a part of it. So it goes to all of our family, right? And that's, so it includes them, but it also their proselytes, their proselytes, the people who decide to follow after Judaism. They're all, any of these people who are adulterers. Acharav. It's kind of the word for behind. Well, it's not kind of. It is the word for behind or after, the furthest back extremity of something. So it's after his, li zanot, after his adultery. So the adulterer, after or behind his adultery, that obviously that's going somewhere in a moment. After again, adultery after adultery, after adultery after adultery, ha-molek. Mikerev, from the midst, I will cut him off. This adulterer after has committed adultery after adulteries, because one thing's piling up on the other. There's lies, there's scheming, there's the lies by omission because we've turned our eyes, and so forth and so on. And the whole family's in this, so this is in plural now. Amam, people in plural, the peoples. So then I will set my attention, or my face, my attention against that man and his family, and will excommunicate him. That's the cut him off. And all adulterers like him, after him, like him, who commit adultery with Moloch from the midst of their people. Onkelos, by Drauzina Wagner, said, did the family sin so that they should also be punished? Doesn't Deuteronomy 24:16 forbid killing children for their parents' sin? During the Roman period, tax collectors were properly considered the same as robbers, or so the sages wrote thousands of years later. Anyway, they go on. Were all of them are not in a sense tax collectors? In other words, if you're a tax collector, aren't all your family tax collectors? For they all protected him. See the argument, and it does. This is a pretty good comparison, if you will, as far as the whole family getting involved, if you will. Because if the whole family is turning their eyes from the crime that this man has committed by throwing his child on the altar. Wait a minute, I thought the my mom said it was the woman who did that. Anyway, now it's the man. Well, according to the Bible, it's the man. So they're saying, aren't they all guilty? Of course the whole family's going to pay for this. Why was it necessary to protect him? Why was it necessary to repeat this information? Sifra, paraphrased by Rashi, which is generally bothered by such seemingly unnecessary repetitions. Why is it repeated here? Many sages see a different instruction each time that the words are repeated. You notice that the words were repeated. Several words were repeated in this thing. In this case, what they're doing is saying, hey, God has already given this law. Why is he repeating it here? Well, he's given us a little more detail, right? Because we get the summation, if you will, and then we get the detail. That's why. Then we get the recap. So that's the third time. And then if it happens to have something to do with something else we're talking about, we get it a fourth time and a fifth and a sixth. That's the writing style of this time and place, which was not known to the sages at the time. That's new. That's very new information. Umberto Casuto wrote about it. You can look him up. I am out of time. Shalom, shalom, everybody.
The blessing, vaYiqra. Yevarecha Yahweh v'yish merecha. Ya'er Yahweh panai v'lecha v'hunecha. Yisa Yahweh panai v'lecha v'yasim lecha shalom. And in English, may Yahweh cause you to lie down so that you may rest. May he touch and caress you. May he prepare you for what is ahead. May he watch over you. May he keep you from harm. May he cause goodness to grow in you and take away the bad. May he arrange your life and cause you to flourish. May he cheer you up and gladden your heart. May he cause his light to shine through you. May he show you tenderness and favor and love in his presence. May he show you kindness and be delicate towards you. May he show you his generosity, mercy, compassion, and desire for you as it comes forth from the depths of his soul. May he lift you out of your pit and deliver you from the things that hold you prisoner. May he draw you to his chest and cast his eyes on yours. May he show you his love and desire for you as he cradles you in his arms. May he bear your punishment and pardon you of your sin. May he take you for his bride. May he establish a foundation in you. May he place his name on your heart and mind and make your body his temple. May you be his treasure. May you always be on his mind. May he draw you near and comfort you when you are afraid. May he assure you there is nothing to fear because he is with you. May you and all that concerns you be at peace because he is your friend. Amen.